G'day, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you how to permanently loosen tight scalene neck muscles. And the twist on this video is that it's very easy to show you a scalene muscle stretch in the hope that that helps you free up that tissue. But clinically, what I find as a physio is we don't often also pair it up with strategies that help you get to the underlying cause of that scalene muscle tightness so that you can address those features as well and give yourself the best chance of not having to care about this tightness in the future. So let's get into it. So in order to show you how to permanently loosen tight scalenes, we obviously need to give you a scalene muscle stretch that you feel immediately makes that scalene tissue feel looser. But on top of that, we're going to go through an exercise that gets to the underlying reason behind why those scalenes may have become tight for you in the first place. We're also going to touch on how to strengthen scalene muscles to try and replace some of that scalene muscle tightness with muscular strength. And then the last thing that we're going to touch on is we're going to have a broader conversation about why we're even having this conversation in the first place. But before we get to those things, the first thing that we need to do is we need to establish an initial baseline of how tight you feel those scalene muscles might actually be, so that after doing each one of these steps, you can immediately compare it again to see if something has actually changed. Because as I try very hard to do as a physio and on this channel, is that I don't want you to feel like you have to trust me on any of this. The only way we'll know if this is working is if you genuinely feel like it's actually changing. So the first thing we need to do is get you to sit on your hand and depress that shoulder girdle downwards. Anatomically, the scalene muscles attach from the neck and run down and insert into the rib cage at the top. So by pulling your shoulder down, we're trying to lengthen the insertion away from the origin to begin with. And because these muscles sit at the side of your neck, what we want to do is obviously we want to tilt your head away from the shoulder that you're depressing. Now, if you didn't know, the scalenes are generally represented by three muscles, one that sits more towards the front, one down the middle, and one that sits more towards the back. So what's really important with this is it doesn't matter which one of these muscles are tight for you, because once you're in this position and you've extended your head a little bit, you can gently rotate your head away or to that shoulder to see which version of this gives you access to the best tightness that you may have. You can also look up and down a little bit more from this position. Ultimately, what we're looking for is some resemblance of tightness that runs down the side of your neck, somewhere down towards the top of that rib cage as it sits underneath your collarbone. One of the tricks that we learned in physio school is that you can also take some of the skin, pull that down a little bit, add some tension into the system, and you might find your ability to rotate away and bend away is less before you feel some of that tightness. So all you need to do is just make sure that you do the consistent movement on both sides. Take note of how far you feel you can go and whereabouts the best version of your tightness is. Remember that, because as we go through each one of these exercises, we're hoping to see that things start to feel looser. So what I've come to understand clinically as someone who's really passionate about trying to figure out the root cause of things is that one of the main reasons why scalene muscles become tight is because the joints and the tissues that they anchor onto underneath are themselves stiff, tight, and restricted. So if you are stiff and tight through the joints of your neck and through the rib cage and upper back joints around the back, then this can ask your brain to tighten up any of the musculature around that area to help out, of which the scalenes are right in the crosshairs. So before stretching your scalene muscles, we want to take something like a ball. You can use a lacrosse ball, a tennis ball, anything that you feel is respectful and reasonable enough to gently press into the joints of your neck and upper back and rib cage. So go looking for any stiffness or tightness, respectfully ask that to free up, and then we can immediately check your scalene muscle tightness again without having stretched it to see what impact it might already be having. So if you can take that ball, again, a great place to start, as we always do, is that there is a bump right at the base of your neck. This one stands out. It's the junction between your neck and your upper back. If you can start here and just a little bit lower down to begin with, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. So if you can gently lie down on top of the ball and then just let it roll directly out to the side a little bit, we're now essentially on the thoracic spinal joints. Now, what's really important about starting in your upper back is that there's two main joints on either side that we need to concern ourselves with. The first are the spinal joints, which are right next to the bumps that you'll feel down the middle of the spine. And then if you move yourself out a little bit further, you'll start to hit the ribs as they attach into that spine. Both of these areas can become stiff and rusty and prompt those scalene muscles to be tight from underneath where they insert into. Once you've found that spot, we need you to stay on this spot, relax onto this spot, and then with your arm extended, we want you to keep your arm straight and bring it as close to the ground as you feel comfortable. So for me, on this particular joint, I can get to here before it feels a little bit stiff. But if I keep at this and oscillate in and out of that end range, what I should feel is it starts to get looser and looser. And then as my arms stay straight, I can start to get it to touch the ground. Then from here, if I move the ball out a little bit more onto the ribs, this feels a little bit stiffer and tighter for me, and repeat the same process, I can only get my arm to here before it feels tight and restricted. But again, as I'm using movement and the pressure from the ball to shear free this stiff first rib, you should notice that it goes further and further and further the longer that I go through this exercise. So you keep going until you've had enough, or that you feel like you've reached the ground. I'm just about to get there now. And then once you've done that, you can come back again, come back to the middle, move it down a little bit, and then repeat that process, looking for each individual joint that feels restricted and tight, and their corresponding rib in between the spine and essentially your shoulder blade. And repeat that same process, trying to mobilize that restriction as best as you feel you can. And then once you spend some time freeing up the top part of that upper back, you're more than welcome to explore down through the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th, looking for anything that might be pulling a bunch of slack out of that area. But again, we're not finished yet. Once you've done that, we want to come above the bump down at the base there and start looking through some of the corresponding neck joint stiffnesses as well. Again, if you start in the middle and just roll off to the side that you're looking for, you should be able to then find and locate some spots that feel a little bit stiff, tight, and restricted. And again, you don't get as much connection with your arm here, so we just want to get you to find the spot. Just let the ball sink in here for 30 seconds or a minute. Allow that tissue a chance to give. And then again, once you've done that, as we did by going down, you can go up as high as you feel is warranted, systematically looking for any of the stiff restricted joints that you can feel that again might be prompting those scalene muscles to be perpetually tight. And then as I mentioned before, we need to know exactly what removing some of this stiffness may do to your scalene muscle tightness. And even though I did that for a few seconds, sitting back in my hand again, I'll pin my tissue down again just for comparison's sake. This time when I tilt to the side, extend a little bit and then rotate from side to side, I can still feel some muscular tightness through here, but it feels genuinely looser and freer and a little bit less rusty than it did before. We do need to release some of that stiffness and restriction through the spinal joints, through your neck, upper back, and through the rib cage. We still need to give you a potent scalene muscle stretch, undo what's been there for a long time. So what's really important to understand when trying to immediately loosen tight scalene muscles is that the old school exercise of just finding some tightness and holding it for 30 seconds is no longer good enough. Those techniques may not necessarily give you much change at all, despite the time you've invested into those activities. What you need to do instead is, again, once you've sat on your hand, depressed your shoulder, tilted your head away, looked up a little bit, and a little bit of a rotation either side to find where your most tight spot is. Once you've found it, we need to actively tense that tightness for 5 to 10 seconds to get your brain involved so that when you stop tensing, it'll relax a little bit, and you might find you can immediately go a little bit further into the stretch than what you could before. We can keep repeating that process. We just try and tense up and squeeze all the tightness as you can feel in that neck for 5 to 10 seconds, and then relax, it'll relax. And again, you'll be able to keep going further and further until you either get sick of it or you stop making change. Now, if you still have some residual joint stiffness underneath that on either side, then the muscles can lengthen and loosen to a certain degree, but if the underlying joints are still rusty enough, then they won't have enough inherent mobility to allow you to go further into that movement. So you can keep switching between some stretching and some ball mobility exercises to make sure that you're capturing anything and everything that's stopping you from expressing full range of motion through your neck in that direction. Now, typically, if you find that it is a little bit harder to find the tension you need to get active, once you've found the position that's most meaningful to you, you can reach over the other side with your hand without gently pulling yourself too much further into the stretch. You can use your hand as a platform to push your head back into in order to engage the tight muscles that you need to engage. Again, doing it for 5 to 10 seconds. When you stop, your body will give a little bit and you might be able to go that little bit further into the stretch than you could before. So again, you want to keep progressing through that as long as you're making change and you feel like the joint restrictions underneath aren't also getting in the way. But as I mentioned at the top of the video, we now need to go through a strength exercise to make sure that we can replace some of that muscular tightness with muscular strength. So one of the great things about having a conversation about trying to permanently loosen tight scalene muscles is that we inevitably come to neck muscle strength. And the reason why this is great is because neck muscle strength exercises aren't traditionally the exercises that we talk about or even practice ourselves when we're doing strength training. So any chance we can get to promote different ways to strengthen the muscles of your neck, the better we'll all be for it. And the philosophy that I want to take with the scalene muscle strength exercises is because there's different strands of scalene muscles and that your neck muscles do not function in isolation. They function as a whole, as does every other muscle group in your body. I want to show you a general strength exercise that you can do that should fatigue everything at the same time. But how I like to strengthen this is just lie down on your side. You're welcome to have a pillow or your hand in this position to start with. And all we want to get you to do is being in a nice tall posture and maintaining the same head position. Just take your hand or your pillow away and hang out here. Most people should be able to stay in this position for upwards of a minute before they start to feel a decent amount of fatigue through the muscles at the side of the neck. Now, obviously, depending on which part of the neck you want to strengthen, you can certainly extend a little bit or rotate down a little bit or rotate up a little bit if you do want to try and bias those scalene muscles specifically. But the idea is if you can hang out here, these isometric contractions are a great way to start the basic process of strengthening the muscles that run down the side of your neck. But if you don't feel that genuine sense of fatigue, then you aren't necessarily giving your neck the stimulus it needs to realize that it's not strong enough and prompt it to come back stronger the next day once you've had a good sleep. And if you've been doing this for a little while or you feel you are advanced enough that a minute is a little bit too easy, then we have another variation of this that you can try. So if you're looking for a little bit more of a challenge, we can progress to using a band of some sort. Most people can get away with using a TheraBand that's tied to something secure. Obviously, make sure that it is securely fastened. But as simple as this may be, all we want to do is pop your head into the band, having the band sitting at about forehead height. And again, you do look a bit silly doing this, but we just want to take a step away and then try to maintain a good posture to really challenge the muscles at the side of the neck in this position. So once you've got some good tension here, you can definitely look up a little bit or look down a little bit. You can try and rotate in one direction or the other, but maintaining the position that you find is a great way to bias different parts of that neck. If you have something like the iron neck floating around, then obviously please consider using it. It's a wonderful device, but most people can get away with doing an exercise like that just with a simple TheraBand. But once you've spent enough time fatiguing the tissues at the side of your neck on either side, everything that we've just gone through may genuinely be meaningless unless we consider this next point. So once you feel like you've been able to loosen up the underlying joints and those scalene muscles together, and you've found a way to fatigue those muscles, the last thing that we need to consider here is why are we having this conversation in the first place? Why is that part of your neck stiff through the joints? Why are the muscles tight over the top, especially if it's one side more than the other? And again, what I've come to understand as a physiotherapist, actively trying to better understand these ideas, the number one reason why we're here having this conversation, why your scalene muscles may consistently and perpetually feel tight or tightened, is that it ultimately comes back to the shapes and the postures that you put that part of your neck and upper back into every second of the day. Now, not all postures are created equal. Some are important, some aren't. But when discussing these concepts with my patients, the one thing that turns up every single time is that there is often a posture and a shape that isn't the ideal posture and shape that someone is getting into consistently throughout the day. Whether that's using a mouse, whether that's typing at a keyboard or using a laptop, sitting down using a phone. It can be something as simple as reclining back into your chair and ultimately watching TV through your feet in a relatively bent neck position where you're looking down a lot. The things that we're trying to uncover here is if we're trying to permanently fix this for you, then it makes sense that we need to look at what's going on in your environment day to day, organize things in a way that helps you better understand what you're putting your neck and upper back into the most consistently throughout your day, and then ranking these things from the most common to the least common, and then just systematically working your way down through the list, analyzing how close to this ideal upright shoulders back posture are you, and how often you sort of dragged out of that shape and held here without knowing it. Because only once you have discovered what might be asking those joints and those tissues in those exact areas to be dysfunctional in the first place, can we then start that process of changing things and expecting them not to come back again permanently. And obviously there may be some scenarios where if you're a chef or if you're like me who's always looking down treating people, there may not be a perfect scenario where you can be ideal consistently. But we need to understand what that balance looks like, where we can never get to the stage where we can close the door in this forever. So just with that in mind, let me know in the comments down below, once you've had to think about this, which shapes and postures do you feel like you're getting into the most throughout the day that might be contributing to some of this stiffness and tightness that you may never have had to connect the dots to before. So as always, I genuinely hope that that information was insightful and ultimately helpful. Let me know how you found it in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video and you found it helpful, please let me know by leaving a like rating on the video and subscribe to the channel if you want more content based on what I find helpful clinically as a physiotherapist. But as always, I sincerely hope that that was helpful and hope to see you next time.